Thanks for staying with us on The Real Story. There's a lot that's happened in the last year, including, yes, it wasn't that long ago, a presidential election, a major election going on during a pandemic. Connecticut scrambled to figure out how to make sure people were able to vote safely. The governor signing an executive order allowing registered voters in the state to vote by absentee ballot in both the August primary as well as the November general election, with the reason being concern over COVID-19. It was a scenario the state was forced into, but now that we've done it, there are loud calls for making absentee ballots without an excuse the norm. And not just that, calls are continuing to grow every day for early voting, which has been considered in our state before. Did you know that Connecticut is one of only 5 states in the country that doesn't allow early voting? Connecticut, Alabama, Mississippi, Missouri, New Hampshire, and South Carolina. Kentucky recently becoming the latest state to allow for not only early voting, but also for no excuse absentee ballots. So, is this the year? It's complicated. Both require changes to the state's constitution. Joining us this morning to talk about these efforts is Secretary of the State, Denise Merrill. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so you have been a big proponent of both of these, and you have made your pitch. You're continuing to make your pitch for these. Is this the year that Connecticut's going to do it? Where are you seeing support, and where aren't you seeing support?
I am seeing a lot of support, certainly among voters. I think 2020 election was so difficult in so many ways, and yet we had the highest voter turnout we've ever had in the state, the highest number of registered voters. And it was because we allowed them to vote more easily. And that's all we're asking for here, is that Connecticut join the 45 other states that already allow their voters to vote either on different days than a Tuesday or by mail with an absentee ballot. So I think this is the year, I really do, because the voters got a taste of it in 2020, and it went very, very well. We had the best election I can remember in my 10 years in office. We had very few problems. We had fewer spoiled ballots than we have in the past for normal elections. But it was because the governor allowed everyone to get an absentee ballot if they applied. And it went very well. People joined up. There were about 35% of the people that voted by absentee ballot, which is a record number, and we managed it. So I think that's what we need to continue, and I think people expect it at this point.
Early voting is something that you've tried to push for before. It hasn't gone through. Tell us what the current bill, the length of time, like when would someone be able to vote if we put through the current legislation?
Well, there are 2 constitutional amendments changing 2 different sections of the Constitution, and it is difficult to change the Constitution. That's the whole problem. That's the only reason I think that Connecticut has not gone in this direction. So one of them would allow early voting, in other words, more days of voting in person. That has already passed once in the General Assembly, so it probably will be on the ballot in 2022. See, anytime you change the Constitution, you have to put it on the ballot so everyone in the state will get a chance to voice their opinion about whether they want these things. The second constitutional amendment is the one that would allow what we call no fault absentee balloting. In other words, you don't have to have an excuse to get an absentee ballot. You can get one if you apply for one. That has a longer haul because it has not been heard before. We need 75% of the General Assembly to vote to push it forward and get it on the ballot in 2022. I am hopeful, if everyone is listening to their voters, and we've done polling on this, a very large majority of people in Connecticut, Republicans, Democrats, unaffiliated voters, they want these opportunities. I think another benefit of all this is we probably won't have to stand in long lines anymore. I think that's the worst form of voter suppression, honestly. So I'm hopeful that this is the year.
75% of the General Assembly, that would include Republicans, I would assume?
Oh, absolutely. This needs to be a bipartisan vote. I think there are Republicans who will be voting for it. It's just we need that 75%. So if you care about this, go talk to your legislators and make sure they're voting for it.
Let's talk about election security, because there are been people who look at absentee ballots and they don't feel comfortable with it. They think people could take advantage of the system. What security protocols are in place, and are they in place? And what you saw, you had said that this was the most secure election you'd seen. Is that correct? Explain to us why.
Absolutely. Because I think it would be very, very difficult to put in a fake ballot, which is what this is the specter that people are raising that don't support this. They're saying, well, someone could fake the signature. You don't know who's actually casting that ballot. We have many, many checks and balances to make sure that doesn't happen. Local officials in every town are the ones that maintain these lists. And you have to be on the list. You have to match up your name and address. And by the way, you need to get your ballot in by 7 o'clock on election day. But there are many, many eyes on these ballots and cross-checked about 3 different ways. So I think people can feel very secure about their ballots. And by the way, they can feel very secure about dropping in the ballot boxes. We did all this so people could feel safe. We had people who couldn't go out to vote, and it is their right to vote. So we need to make it possible for everyone, and that's exactly what this does.
How often does Connecticut, and this might be on the local level, check their voter rolls? Because a lot of the arguments out there are saying, okay, well, that might be secure, but your voter rolls, they haven't been checked, and dead people are voting, and, along those lines. So what's your response to that?
That's absolutely not the case. Occasionally one may slip through, but those voter rolls are checked by the local officials every year. And if you do not respond to the message that you get, either through the mail or however they do it, there are several different ways they do it at the local level, then you are at worst put on a separate inactive list. But you can still come back and vote and kind of bring yourself back on the list. We're very careful before we take someone off the rolls, but every town checks that list once a year. So the real problem is people move a lot. There's a lot of mobility. It's very difficult to keep up. But again, you have to produce some form of ID when you go to vote. Or if you're voting by absentee ballot, you still have to show that you are the person on that list. So I think you can feel very secure. All these objections that have been raised are all hypothetical. There's been no evidence that any of this is actually going on, even though there have been court case after court case trying to prove that some of this nefarious activity is going on. It simply isn't. And we have no record of it here in Connecticut in particular.
All right, so where do these bills stand right now?
They are waiting on the House floor. I believe they will be heard this month, probably by the end of the month. And so, as I said, one of them just needs a simple majority, and that's the early voting constitutional amendment. That will probably move forward to the Senate in the next few weeks. And then everyone in the state will get a chance to vote on whether or not they'd like to have these early voting or no-fault absentee balloting. And I think that's the way it should be.
And how many people need to vote? Like, what's the percentage for it to pass?
That's just a simple majority on the ballot. The only time you need that 75% is to get it on the ballot more quickly. Even if it only got a simple majority, it would move forward. It would just have to be voted on a second time by a second General Assembly. It's just a long haul. If it doesn't get the 75%, that means we can't get it on the ballot until 2024.
But so on the ballot, how many voters need to vote for it to go through?
Simple majority.
Okay, I thought you were talking about General Assembly. Got it. Yeah. Okay, interesting. Well, it's a big year. We have a lot of big legislation here in Connecticut because last year, there wasn't much work that the legislature could do because of COVID. So we know there's a lot of big issues out there, from online gaming to marijuana to early voting. So I know there's a lot of topics that people are hoping get pushed through, some not hoping they get pushed through, but a lot to talk about here in Connecticut.
Well, I think this one, its time has come. So I'm hoping this is the year because we need to join the rest of the country on these matters.
All right, Secretary of the State Denise Merrill, thank you so much for coming back on and chatting with us on The Real Story.
Thanks, Jen.
Have a good one. All right, that does it for us on The Real Story. If you want to watch these segments again, head to fox61.com or download the Fox 61 app and watch The Real Story every Sunday at 10 a.m. right here on Fox 61. Have a great morning.